Joining me today on Eyes Wide Open is Graham Moore, a man who proudly describes himself as an Englishman and a constitutionalist, believing in the law of the land, the common law, a belief in the principles of freedom first, freedoms that no man, no parliament, or no court can take away from us. Despite facing what appears to be an insurmountable challenge, Graham charges forward with what for me is a unique angle on what's really going on in England and beyond. Now, I say England, but before discovering Graham's work, I would have said the United Kingdom or Britain. I don't think I'll ever use those terms positively again, though. Graham has provided me with a giant piece in the jigsaw to understand what's really going on in our home, England. Until recently, I would never have identified as English, mainly because I didn't know what being English meant. But thanks to Graham, I understand that's largely due to the propaganda campaign against the English by the British. So today, Graham will tell us his story of how he became an English constitutionalist and a common law champion against the British Union, and how we can use the largely forgotten English constitution as the solution. Graham Moore, otherwise known as Daddy Dragon, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Now, we met briefly during the Save Our City anti-lockdown protests in Liverpool. I think we got arrested on the same day, so we didn't get a chance to chat much further than that. Yeah, so I'm really happy to discover your work again and have you on the show. And before we get into the meat of it, can you tell us what you were doing before you embarked on this constitutional crusade and what you were doing in your previous life?
Well, the direct answer to that is I've got a number of trades, but one of the things I was previous to this was an engineer, an internet engineer called a Tier 1, where I provided engineering services to one of the largest companies in the world, which basically built the internet. Various things going back in my past, but I left home when I was 14 years old, believe it or not. Lived on the streets, started work on a building site at 15, had a window cleaning round when I was 16, had a child very early, and stayed married for 30 odd years. So lots of, I've got what I would say an association with what I describe as real working class, including the fact that I'm also a tradesman, a carpenter, and the reality of being English and then seeing the pressures over at least the last 35 years where we've been losing all of our rights. And I've started studying the Constitution 30 years ago, including the Archibalds, going through the laws, and then looking and reading history. At school, I didn't really like history, to be honest with you. But I did find that once you read history and you go to the archives, not to what someone's opinion of history is, but when you actually read the real history, and then obviously reading about the Declaration of Rights, reading about the Magna Carta, reading about the Bill of Rights, reading about all of the elements of our constitutional law and why they was put in place, what you can see is you start to bring history alive and talk to people about that. You can see history is repeating itself. So the basis of it is I had a fairly normal upbringing. My father has always, believe it or not, voted Labour, even though he owned his own factory and he worked in the factory as well. He was on the lathes as well. He was a tradesman. He was taught his trade by my granddad, and he taught me that trade as well. So again, and that's as a metal spinner. So again, family background has always been a working background, and it just progressed from there. But my interest in history and constitutional law comes from the research when you start to realise where did it all come from.
So when did you become Daddy Dragon, and what was the event, what was the moment, what led you to begin this adventure that you're on now?
Well, it's funny you should say that, because people always ask me, how did you get the name Daddy Dragon? I didn't name myself that. The people that have started following and listening, I was on Facebook before I got banned like everyone else, and all I'm doing is talking about constitutional law and the English. And then someone sent me a law book, and in it, So let me just explain where the daddy dragon comes from. The dragon is the original flag of the English.
The white dragon.
The white dragon is the original flag of the English, and that was the standard that was taken into battle, etc. The original flag of England is the dragon. So what someone then did was sent me a book, and inside that book it said to Father Dragon, because he was referencing me talking about the English and the dragon. And, you know, again, if you go back in history, you'll see one of the oldest regiments, which was disbanded in 1964, was from Kent, and it was called the Dragons. And again, it was disbanded by the British in 1964. It went back centuries.
I think it's an apt name, though, isn't it? You know, it's an apt name for someone who was championing this cause, the Dragon of England, you know. But you describe yourself as a constitutionalist rather than a nationalist, which I think is a really, really good way of avoiding that label. Right. So tell me about the distinction between constitutionalist and nationalist, and the English Constitution, the common law, what it is and why it's important.
Right. So it's really important to understand. So before I get into where and what and why, I'll give you an example of a person who was a constitutionalist, and that is Winston Churchill. He stood in 1924. And what he said with 10 others is basically that he walked away from the mainstream parties, and he said that all the mainstream parties were seeking to destroy the English Constitution. And he said, I'm going to stand as an independent, as a constitutionalist. He won his seat in 1924.
As an independent?
As an independent, but as a constitutionalist. But people knew what a constitutionalist was then, right? So it's about liberties and freedoms. What happened after that, and to explain constitutionalism, the Constitution is about the law of the land. You have the common law. So let me just explain to people where common law comes from. Common law comes from customary law. So in Liverpool, for example, if you had a custom in Liverpool and everyone adhered to that local custom, it's customary law, right? And it can be used in the courts. And you can say this has been a custom of Liverpool since time immemorial, what it's known as, right? If it's such a good law, so it comes from a village and then the custom spreads to a town and then to a city and then to a county, if it's such a good law, it could be adopted by the English Parliament because they say, well, we think everyone should know this because it's a great custom and a great law. And then they adopt, it becomes, as it spreads, it becomes common law. And then if it's adopted by the Parliament, it becomes a, if you like, constitutional
statute,
common law constitutional statute, right? So there are many of those, and again, I've got a big list of them that you'll see. So
a custom, once it's adopted on a national level, will become a constitutional law via a constitutional statute.
Correct.
Yeah.
Right. So, and again, so the Constitution is about your liberties and freedoms, but again, it doesn't have to be in statute. It could be common law. So let me just explain that there is a group of laws or a set of laws which is called the law of tort. Mm-hmm. Right. So if someone, for example, was to say something really bad about you, libel you, or slander you where they actually say it, and there's a record of that, and you can say that's caused me damage, you would use the law of tort, to get recompense for the damage against you, right? So there is a whole set of English law going back hundreds and hundreds of years, and that's what you would use. And I'll give you an example. Today, for example, people shouldn't be using judicial review; they should be using the law of tort. If, for example, someone was coercing you into doing something you didn't want to do, or to ingest something that you didn't want to ingest, and they was coercing you and there was no informed consent, I'm deliberately not mentioning what it should be, you therefore have a tort against them people, right? And
would that be recorded as precedent in the courts, and that's what we would rely upon in order to enforce our rights?
exactly.
Yeah.
So again, you've just hit one of the major words. So in common law, we have precedents, and they are set either by the House of Lords, as it used to be, or the Supreme Court. Once that ruling comes out, it is the law of the land, right? That's the common law. A statute does not become common law, and it doesn't really become law until a judge interprets that law. That is the common law. The judge's interpretation of reading the law and how it applies to you is the common law, right? Complete opposite to Roman law.
So you could have a statute that doesn't comply with the common law, and therefore it's unconstitutional.
Exactly that. And that is the basis of the Madison case in the United States of America. We've actually had them at a local level, them cases. But what people have got to understand is the common law controls the statute, not the other way round. And you've only got to go and look at a ruling, for example, by Lady Howe, where she actually says, just because something statute doesn't mean someone had, if they've done something by statute and think that it's okay to do it, it still may be a tort, and that person could still claim damages against you. The statute doesn't give you the right to injure somebody else. And that's the important thing about it. But yeah, precedent is really very, very important, because it is, and again, people don't realise it is judge-made law. So it's the judges. The problem that you've got is, and again, this gets in a bit more detail, but the problem that you've got is that the British changed our constitutional way of selecting judges. Yeah. So what did they do? They created the Constitutional Reform Act of 2005, and that led on to the Supreme Court, which is unlawful, because our legal system is in the House of Lords, not in the Supreme Court. And what they did was then they created a political way of appointing judges.
Was the Supreme Court Act, which established the Supreme Court and disconnected us from the House of Lords as the court of last resort, where constitutional statutes like the Magna Carta, etc., could be used by us, the people? Was the Supreme Court established to block us from finding those legal remedies?
Yeah. So, again, let's just kick back into that.
Yeah.
You just mentioned the Magna Carta.
Yeah.
The Magna Carta 1215 was the first human rights declaration in the world, right? And it comes from the English. It's not British, it's English, right? It wasn't used for somewhere in the region of 200 years in any form, in any court, until Sir Edward Coke put his hand up and said, under English law, the Magna Carta is still law. And we are intending to use it. And he started to reintroduce it because tyranny started taking hold of the country.
Right.
And the Magna Carta was then reintroduced into law. The most recent ones where it's been used, I'll give you an example, was Diana Rose used it. There was a big union issue, and she actually said, the Magna Carta says this, and she won her case. You all remember the renditions of Iraqis to certain areas or whatever, and the British government were torturing these people in Saudi Arabia, for example. They was taken to court in London in the English High Court, and the Magna Carta was brought up again. And again, they won their case, and they was awarded £1.8 million in damages. So when people say it doesn't exist, it does exist. Now, you've got to be clear to people, the 1215 Magna Carta is still in existence, and people argue with me all the time, no, it's not.
Is it not on the statute books, though?
Right, so this is what you've got to understand. Yeah. The original Magna Carta was outside of the jurisdiction of there was no parliament at that time.
Right.
It was an agreement, a declaration, sealed, not signed, and it become part of the law of the land. So for Parliament to then come along and reconstruct it and then start repealing bits that it wants to repeal. It doesn't affect the first 12, 15 Magna Carta. And anyone who says it does, 9 out of 10 times are British. Roman law has a doctrine which means that a newer law repeals, if you like, the last law, blah, 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 blah. That isn't in effect with the English, right? And you cannot repeal the common law. The common law is the common law. The only way in which you can, a judge or a series of judges can sit there and they can make a decision. It's very rare, but they can make a decision and say that this common law judgment is wrong. It was wrongly heard, or wrongly a wrong precedent was set, and they can change it. That's the only way it can be done. So again, people need to understand that there's a big difference in our legal system. The English legal system protects the individual against the state. It was there to protect the individual against the monarchy, an absolute monarchy.
And the foundation document for that was the Magna Carta, which forms a series of other documents, customs and traditions which make up the English Constitution. Now, isn't it said that the English Constitution is unwritten? Doesn't that need a bit of definition? It's a good question, and there's an argument on both sides, right? The easiest way to explain this to people is that in America, the American War of Independence wasn't caused because they wanted to separate from the Crown as a colony. It was caused because the English stood up and said, we want the same rights as an Englishman, right? That's what it was caused about, right? That's what, and again, remember, when the Mayflower left in 1620, the who aboard that craft were English. British didn't come about until, 100 years later, right? Well, actually 1606, 1607, and I'll get back and explain them parts. So getting back to, what is it and a written constitution? People often say we haven't got a written constitution. We have. Yeah.
It isn't codified in the same way as the Americans' constitution, because we as a nation developed it over hundreds of years with statutes, but it is only a constitutionalist would understand how them statutes fit together, and why the constitution is it is. What does it mean, and why is it better to have, if you like, an unwritten constitution in terms of how it all fits together? The answer is that because as times change, you can change. But there are certain things you cannot change. The Bill of Rights, you cannot change. And what the British did was they removed the Constitution from the curriculum. So they stopped teaching the kids about it in the early 1970s, and they removed it from the bar exams. So judges and barristers didn't know anything about it. They become British or Soviet, what I call Soviet judges, because they represent the state. They don't represent you as a person or the majesty of England. They now represent the British state. So people often ask me, why did they do that? And I said, you've only got to look at what happened. In 1972, we went into the European Union. It was illegal. It was unconstitutional. And the Bill of Rights clearly said that. In the Bill of Rights, there is a clause, a paragraph. It is called the supremacy paragraph. And in that paragraph, it is clear no one can govern us. Nobody governs the English. We govern ourselves. So they knew it was unlawful. What did they do? They removed it from the curriculum. They removed it from the judges, and older barristers knew what it was there for. So the second element is, how did they attempt, and how do we know that they were so wrong? Was because they created the European Communities Act of 1972 and made it law. Why did they have a referendum in 1975? Because they had to correct what they had done wrong. And then the media and the British, call them what you like, bureaucracy, deep state, establishment, not the people of England, they created con people, right, into forcing it over. So, again, they wouldn't have done all that unless they knew what they'd done was illegal, and it was illegal.
Okay, so one of the central planks of your argument is that the British are distinct from the English, and that the British Union, better known as the United Kingdom, is the biggest enemy we and other nations around the world face, but particularly the English. Now, I've never heard that argument before, and it struck a chord with me, and I heard it immediately. I thought, whoa, that's like a grand unifying theory that makes sense of a whole lot of holes in the story. So to avoid confusion and to help anyone that's not heard this angle before, can you tell us who are the British and how are they different from the English?
Right. The easiest way to describe this is the British are the slavers. The British are the colonialists. The British are the imperialists, right? So the first thing to explain to people, if they talk about the union, we don't want to split the union up, right? I'll get back to that in a couple of seconds, but I will say this. The unification of the crowns, the majesties, that means Scotland and England, took place in 1603. It is not affected by what we're discussing now, which is independence for England, right? What then happened in 1706, 1707 is the supranational state. They created two parliaments put together to create the supranational state.
Like the EU?
Well, it's the same as the EU. It's the same as the Soviet Union. Yeah. It's the same as Yugoslavia. But the supranational state of the colonialists was what the British elites created. And England became, and so did Scotland, became a colony of the British Empire at that time.
So Britain is a relatively new entity.
So Great Britain is an island. So that's what you've got to remember. We're part of Europe, but we're not of it, right? We have oceans that surround us rather than land masses. It is key to remember that being an island, we created, and the majority of people lived in England, right? We created our own economy. We created our own sets of laws. And the key element to this is Great Britain is an island. There is no one disputing that Britain is a place. It is. And it's no different to the island, and I forget what it's called now, but it's in the Caribbean. Just for example, there is an island that contains two nation states, Dominion Republic, and then you've got Haiti, right? One of them is a capitalist and doing very well for itself, and the other one is socialist and not doing very well for itself. It's fairly obvious that there is a massive problem over there. So again, it's not an unusual thing to have an island that shares two separate nations and two separate cultures, right? Which is what we've got with England and Scotland, right? We're not suggesting, and I would never suggest that I don't like the Scots. That all of what you see out there to do with blacks, whites, even parties to some extent, it's all a construct of the British. What they've always done everywhere in the world is they divide and rule. Yeah. So they create a situation where everyone's fighting each other, and then you're not looking at them. Yeah. And what we're saying is you need to be looking at them, right? So getting back to that situation, and it is, most people don't realise that it was the English that stopped slavery, and it was a guy called Granville Sharp. There was a very famous case called the Somerset case, 22nd of June, 1772. And basically, there had already been an earlier ruling by a Chief Justice in England called Sir John Holt. And he had already coined the phrase that English air is too pure for any slave to breathe. You must free the black, right? And what was happening was black people in the colonies was getting back to England because they knew that in England they were not allowed to be slaves. Our common law forbid it. In fact, if you go back all the way to the 600s, the year 600s, if you was to sell a villager into slavery, your forfeit was your weight in gold, right? So at the end of the day, there was always laws there to protect against slavery. It is different to the villainy and the lord set up and serfs in that sense, right? Push this forward, what happened, that case, the Somerset case, the unintended consequence of that case, which, and by the way, Granville Sharp was an Englishman, he was white, he was working class, he was a tradesman, and guess what, people? He was a layman in law. And yet he brought the people together. He found slavery abhorrent. He helped the blacks. There was about 15,000 blacks who had made their way to this country, right? Meaning England. And they were freed, basically. As soon as your feet touch English soil, you are no longer a slave, right? And then they don't teach you about this history because they don't want you to know. This guy, Granville Sharp, has actually got in the African Museum in London a plaque to his name. He's actually buried in Fulham in London. There's a tomb where he's buried. He was the one. Now, the unintended consequence is over the next 80 years, that case was being used in America.
As a precedent.
Now, it had set a precedent.
Yeah.
Let me just say this to you. Lord Mansfield took 3 terms to give his judgment, kept getting in touch with the slavers, one of them just happened to be a British barrister, right? Kept getting in touch with the slavers and saying, you don't want to do this. I think you should just let the slave go, basically, because there's potential that my judgment is not going to be what you're looking for, right? And they carried on. They insisted that this Somerset was their slave, right? And the judge made a ruling, and the ruling was free the black. Now, Granville Sharp chased the ship that tried to take him away, used habeas corpus as a writ from the English courts to get him off the ship. He was strapped with his hands behind the mast. They took him off the strip and took him back into London. Now, the point of all of this is we have been vilified as racists when we are the people that stopped slavery, not the British. The British wanted to carry on. People don't realise there was 2 elements to what was going on. There was English law, which was English common law, but the colonies, which were being controlled by the British, the British establishment, they had colonial law. And it was the colonial law that was clashing with the English common law. And in the end, the English common law said, we're not having this anymore. You can't do it, right? And that is, again, after some time, I believe about 80 years, in the end, there was a civil war in 1860, which basically freed the slaves. But what you had was loyalists in America to the British Crown that wanted to continue with slavery. And you had, if you like, English constitutionalists that didn't want to do that.
So would you say that the British, then, we could maybe define them as the City of London bankers and Bank of England, which was created to create fractional reserve banking? Is it that group? Is it that, colonialist empire are the British rather than, because we need to, I think the definition is really important. Who are they? Is it the City of London?
Well, they're not me and you, put it that way. So what you've got is a group of people that over centuries their families have built up wealth. They have become the elites. They see us as slaves, and whether we have got chains on our ankles, our feet, or whatever it is to become a slave, and whether you be black, white, brown, or yellow, I don't care. And they have created a form of enslavement via debt, right? If you go back to the original Magna Carta, right, it doesn't say in the original Magna Carta that the it mentions the City of London and their financial rights and privileges. But what the Magna Carta does is say those rights should be extended to all towns, villages and cities throughout England.
Right.
Who has taken that away from you? The British. Because every county in England should have its own bank. So you should have one in Lancashire.
Because that protection for the City of London that's in the Magna Carta, isn't that one of the few articles that remain on the statute books, that specific one?
Not only is that correct, and we're not worried about the statute books, because if the British have repealed something, there's a simple way of solving all of this, and you void the Acts of Union. What give the British their power, right? It was the Acts of Union of 1706 and 1707. That's what created a British Parliament, right? All we do is void that. And then people say, but you're destroying the Union. And you say, no, you're not, because the unification of the Crown is left intact, because that happened in 1603. What you're doing is doing the same as what the Russians did and said, we will not stand for a Soviet state anymore. You will not control the Russians. You will not control the Ukrainians. You will not control with your way of doing things. And that's what so the British were the people who installed the Soviet Union and as it was. Let me just explain something else to people, because I think people don't realise this. I'm English. Go and have a look at the British Nationality Act of 1981, right? Mm-hmm. It tells you, by law, you are now British. They have illegally removed your identity as an Englishman and a Scotsman and an Irishman and a Welshman. Someone needs to say, who was the last person who did that? Joseph Stalin.
And who created the Soviet Union?
People need to start to see exactly what they're doing. And that's, so getting back to the original question of what is it? Who are they? You've mentioned the Magna Carta. It is really important for people to understand one thing. The Magna Carta didn't say that the City of London has complete control over all finance. It didn't say that. What it said was the City of London can keep its financial privileges, but we, the Magna Carta and the people, are extending those privileges to every county, to every city, every town and every village. That's what it said.
So we have the right to coin our own currency as well as the City of London.
Listen, that's exactly right. And it's what they done in America, right? Because so what we've got is a situation in the United States of America. And don't forget, America adopted our Constitution. It adopted the English common law. It adopted all of the elements, including their Second Amendment. Their Second Amendment, the right to keep and bear arms, was a pre-existing right. And there's evidence of that. You've got Supreme Court judges in America actually saying that. It pre-existed the Bill of Rights. The Bill of Rights reaffirmed that right, that you have the right to self-defense. So, again, people don't realise what it is that the British have done. Let's just talk about, you can talk about any element of this, the right to silence. They've taken your right to silence because it used to be you have the right to remain silent. Yeah. Now it is, if you remain silent, an inference can be drawn against you by a court of law.
That's not the right to remain silent, is it? You know, I got arrested recently at the protests and the anti-lockdown protests, and that's exactly what they said to me. You know, they said that you have the right to remain silent, except if you do, an inference will be made against you, and the jury might rule against you. And I was like, well, not the jury or the judge, you know, whatever. But the point being is that can't be a right to silence, can it? Because if you say if you don't say anything, we're going to find you guilty because you haven't said anything. Then they've removed that right.
So who took it? And the answer is it wasn't the English, because we haven't got a parliament. They have created the British supranational state by these two acts.
How could they take a common law right away, though, if it's an inalienable right? Where does their authority come to do that, or is it just illegal?
No, it's illegal. The problem we've got is that the British, and especially these elites in the background, are training people through the universities in law to be told that Parliament is sovereign. Yeah. That is not what the Bill of Rights said. The Bill of Rights forbid Parliament being sovereign, and it forbids an absolute monarchy. We are sovereign.
Is this during the Glorious Revolution when this new definition happened?
Yeah. So the Glorious Revolution, by the way, there wasn't one declaration. There were about 10 in told, right? But if you actually go and read the real history in the archives, you can see exactly what they were saying. That's what they don't like. They don't like the fact that you're not putting a British taint on it, which is what the British have been trying to do. And what they then did is they took the declaration and they made it statute, and they brought it into force with, so the Bill of Rights of 1688 is still in full force. All right. And let me just say this to everyone. The words all and singular, right? That means all of the rights. You can't take one and it not affect the others. So all and singular, those rights are still there. They're still valid to this day. It says forever 3 times in that one document or one law, and it says in this kingdom for all time to come once, right?
Just to clarify, isn't the Bill of, sorry to interrupt you, just want to get more detail on that. Isn't the Bill of Rights the important thing to understand about the Bill of Rights, that our right to bear arms is enshrined in it? And we believe, or we're led to believe, that that is no longer an act that we can rely upon.
Correct. Yeah. And that is unlawful, what the judges are saying. You need judges to stand up. What it also says in the Bill of Rights is you have the right to keep and bear arms for self-defence, and it says as allowed by law. What they've done is taken that one element from the statute and said, well, we can create a law that says that you've got to be licensed, you've got to be this, you've got to be this. They're not allowed to do that. If you go back and read the declarations and the debates at the time, as allowed by law means self-defence laws. So if someone is attacking you, you have the right to self-defence and you have the right to discharge a firearm at them. That's what as allowed by law means. It's actually written, and you can read through the debate about it. They was more worried at the time that we'd have guns and would be nicking their game. Was more worried about us shooting their deer and their rabbits and the hogs on their land than they was, because everyone knew that murder, you're going to get hung for it, right? But you do have the right to self-defence. So once people understand that, and I may say this to everyone, at no time ever has any statute ever forbidden your right to self-defence. Previously, one other party put into their manifesto the right to self-defence again. And the person who can allow you, so let's say I was standing as a police commissioner, an elected police commissioner, I tell the chief constable, you shall issue a firearm to that person and you will give them. So for us, once you get your independence back again, your passport, your English passport, becomes your firearms license.
The right is enshrined in the fact that you're an English citizen or an English subject.
Right. So let's get now you're in elements of this. There's something else called the Act of Settlement. The Act of Settlement is even more powerful. Of 1701, even more powerful, still English. Than the Bill of Rights, because in that it actually states that the laws of England are the birthright of an Englishman. British have took that away. There is a paragraph in there, I believe it's paragraph 7, that was repealed. The Act of Settlement is a constitutional statute. It cannot be repealed. Who is it repealed by? By the British, right? And if you reverse engineer everything they've put in place bit by bit, by bit by bit, yeah, the British have taken every liberty that you was entitled to. It isn't gone forever. We're just waiting for the English to wake up and say, now we can see what you're doing. And by the way, English law protects everyone on our soil. If you're black, white, brown, yellow, the English Constitution protects you all against the state. And that's the crucial thing. Never get involved with this racism BS, because it is a construct of the British to divide and rule. The only way we win is when we come together under the Constitution, and you're going to see that in America, right? The most important thing, there are many constitutional documents, and it gets back to our original part of the conversation about a written and unwritten. Our laws go back centuries and centuries to 927 and beyond, believe it or not, because you've got the customary law that kicked in before that. That is all part of what we do, and it's different. So, again, people need to understand the Act of Settlement is crucial. Because the British have tried to
give us a little bit of background on what the Act of Settlement is and on what it does.
The Act of Settlement basically, and again for the people who I just want to say this before I start, right? The Act of Settlement had to be brought in because the Protestant line was about to end. So Queen Anne and her descendants, they had to bring a way in of keeping the Catholics out, right, of all forms of power. And basically the Act of Settlement did that. And to a large extent, it still does, except they're ignoring it yet again. So before anyone says to me, so you don't like the Catholics, right, I was married to a Catholic for 30. I'm a Protestant. I was married to a Catholic for 30 odd years, right? I've got no issue with Catholics. I don't believe a Pope in Rome should have any control over me as an Englishman, right? I don't believe in many. So we reject laws from foreign nations having control over us.
It's a civil law, that, isn't it? I mean, that's where you got the two streams of law in England. One is the civil law and one is common law, civil law coming from Rome.
Yeah. So the civil, and civil law, people need to understand it's not difficult once you actually get taught this. And by the way, they used to teach kids about this. They used to have something called civic classes, right? And then when they got rid of the civic classes from comprehensive schools, the only schools that still had it were private schools and grammar schools. And then you see the attacks on the grammar schools and getting rid of grammar schools. But you had the cleverest working class kids in grammar schools being taught constitutional history. You can see their attacks, and it's all about attacking the English and really the working class. Remember who the Fabian Society are. The Fabian Society were created, the Fabian Society founded the Labour Party, but who created and funded the Fabian Society? Well, the industrialists. Who were the industrialists? The Rothschilds, the British, and the Rockefellers.
Well, that's a. Before we go on to the Fabians, because that is a question I want to discuss. But yeah, let's take it back to the Act of Settlement. Why that's so important to our understanding of how to reclaim the English Constitution.
The reason why it's so important is because they set up rights for the English and the English men and women, right? It set a set of rules up, and some of them rules, for example, was how many, and I'll give you an example where there's a current breach. I think there's something like 195 ministers of the Crown that sit in Parliament. If you're a minister of the Crown, you become part of the Privy Council. Mm-hmm. And in effect, that means the Crown is inside Parliament, and you're doing the bidding for the Crown.
Well, as the Privy Council. And are you saying that the Crown is the British?
So again, that's another good question. People often ask me this about. So the British have removed all of the Crown's powers. The Crown, meaning Her Majesty, and meaning the Majesty, right? So whatever monarchy is, have not assented to a law since 1849. But now, if you go and look and see what happens...
Do you mean the power of veto, assenting? Do you mean a statute that's being delivered by Parliament, the sovereign has to finish it with the assent consent.
Yeah. So assent is they agree, they sign and they assent it, and it's brought into law.
Right.
But no monarch has assented to a law since 1849, because the British, and I can get back and tell you when it started, right? The British have taken all the monarch's powers. So what we had was separation of powers. The monarchy, we had Parliament, and we had the judiciary.
Like America's Constitution still protects the separation of powers, doesn't it?
Correct. Yeah. And what the British have done, have removed the separation of powers and brought them all under their United Kingdom British Parliament.
Which is tyranny. You know, that the separation of powers is there to prevent tyranny. That's the whole point of it, isn't it? So when it comes back together under one, then you're under a tyranny.
Which is what we're seeing now. Yeah. Because there's no one out there protecting us. And that's why we've started talking about constitutional issues and constitutional rights. And it's coming to a fore where some people are saying, hang on a minute, you can't be doing this. So getting back to the Act of Settlement, there are many, I think there's been 3 repeals of it. Again, they shouldn't have repealed it. We'd put it back in its entirety. The only way you can change something that is constitutional is if you take it to referendum and the people vote on it. And then you'd have to tell them the truth. Mm-hmm. The problem we've got is that who controls the media? Well, the answer is
British.
Ofcom. Who is Ofcom? It's a British entity. Yeah. They're all there to protect themselves. Remember one thing. Everyone out there, remember one thing. Once you void the Acts of Union, every bad law that the British ever set up under that Parliament is torn up. Everything. And remember what happened to the Soviet Union. When the Soviet Union disbanded, they didn't leave the UN. The UN said, who is going to represent the states and the smaller states? And Russia said, us. And they said, you can carry on. You're going to... And they will say that to us. Right, the UN will turn around to us and say, do you want to represent England? And we'd say, yeah. And then we'd say, but we have provisos.
By getting rid of the Act of Union, the United Kingdom would be disbanded. The nations that are within the United Kingdom would become individual sovereign nations. Yeah, and the English Parliament, English Constitution would return, and the British would be, just a footnote of history.
Yeah, exactly that. And that's what they're so terrified of, because they have tried to steal from us our nationality, tried to steal and morph our identity as them. That's why people get confused when they say, well, I'm British.
Yeah, I was confused.
Again, if you go back and look at what happened to the Soviet Union, if you called a Polish person a Soviet, today, you probably get a right-hander, right? If you called a Russian a Soviet, they'll say, I am not a Soviet. That was a construct of the Soviet Union. And who helped put it in place? The British. So once people get to realise that, so getting back to what you've just said then, what happens if you disband or you void, and it must be void, the Acts of Union? I can tell you exactly what happens. The counties take their power back. You go back to a decentralised system. You go back to independent bankings of each county. The power of the City of London becomes almost mute because they'll have competition from every county. A flat rate tax system that you put it to referendum and you say to people, that's it, it's in the Constitution, that's what the tax system is. You need to defund socialism. You need to defund communism. You need to defund fascism. All 3 are forbidden under the English Constitution.
Okay, let's talk about that. Let's move on to that subject because that's quite interesting. Hearing you talk about socialists and how pernicious socialism is, being from Liverpool, you can't escape socialism. It's like the identity of the city, but most Liverpudlians have got no idea what it even means. They just think it's, an anti-Tory position. And it's most exemplified by Liverpool FC's slogan, "Scouse, not English." Yeah, which came about as a defiant retort to the Thatcher government, who attempted to destroy the city. Now, being a Liverpool fan myself, I thought it was always a brilliant, rebellious statement and a position to take. However, now I believe it's just the position of the Fabian socialists who run the British state, and it's symbolic of the subjugation of the English, and by proxy, the rest of our Celtic brethren. So I now think English, not British, might be a better, more rebellious turn of phrase. But I think it highlights the lack of understanding of what it actually means to be English, and this massive propaganda campaign headed up by the British occupation. So can you give us a little bit of insight into what you mean by socialists and this idea of the Fabians? Because I know the Fabians like the slow march through the institutions, as opposed to the Marxists who want a revolution, a violent revolution. Because that's going to jar with some people, trying to understand what socialism means in context of what you're talking about.
Right. So the easiest way to describe this is first of all, let me make clear to everybody out there, and I want to make this absolutely clear. I don't consider myself left or right. I am a constitutionalist. I believe in the rule of law, the law of the land, and that we are all equal under the law and God. Right? That's that. I don't. So the next thing that you've got to understand about this is the British, every single party in the British Parliament is British, whether it's Labour, it's a one-party system. It's a Soviet system. People don't realise what it is. The Tories are actually socialists.
It's an illusion of democracy, isn't it, in order to think we've got a choice and we're not living under a tyranny?
Exactly that. It's an illusion of democracy because the people that are controlling it, it's an illusion, everything that's going on. So let's just talk about the Labour Party first, right? Now, I say certain things to people, and I'll get people that would be described as on the right calling me a commie, right? And I look at them and I'll just say, why? Because I've said one comment, so I care about people, right? So people have to understand the Labour Party are really split between three groups of people. You've got people that are, in effect, fascists. You've got people that are Marxists, and you've got people that are communists. They're all outwardly under the red flag, if you like. You've then got people like the Liberal Democrats. And by the way, nearly every single member of the Liberal Democrats are Fabians, right? The Labour Party, every one of Tony Blair's cabinet, bar one, was a Fabian. Every Labour Prime Minister in this country has been a Fabian member, right? They've all been Fabians. Sadiq Khan is a Fabian, an executive member of the Fabian Society. Keir Starmer is an executive member of the Fabian Society. The Fabian Society are Marxists, right? They even say on their website, if you look at their emblem,
it's a wolf in sheep's clothing.
Yeah. They can't make it more obvious.
Yeah.
What they're doing. But they have what's known as a gradual, and the Fabians was a gradualisation. So they nick a bit, so you don't notice. The problem is some of us are noticing, and things are speeding up at the moment because they know they're in trouble. Karl Marx actually said that every communist revolution has been shipwrecked on the Rock of England. He didn't say the Rock of Britain. He said the Rock of England. Common law forbids Marxism, fascism, and communism. Why does it? Because it has a doctrine within our legal system, a maxim, if you like, which is restraint of trade. The monarch is not allowed, and therefore the government is not allowed to create a monopoly. They are not allowed to do that. They are not allowed to tell you you can't earn a living, right? And it comes under the restraint of trade doctrine. The last famous person to use it football player.
Oh, Wayne Rooney.
Wayne Rooney.
Yeah.
Wayne Rooney. He used it,
Yeah.
right? In the Supreme Court, and there was a ruling against it, right? So people need to understand that this law is there to protect you. So the next element is to understand, and by the way, the Tories have also got Fabian Society members within the Tory party that are committed Marxists, right? They went to the London School of Economics and got their degrees in politics, which is funded by the Fabian Society, which is funded and was funded by the Rockefellers. So people don't need to understand where this is coming from.
But see, for me, it's like socialism, Marxism, Fabianism. I mean, that's an economic ideology, and their opponent, or what they seek to destroy, is capitalism. That is the overt expressed objective of socialism and communism. Why would they want to destroy the common law and the English Constitution?
Because the common law and the English Constitution. So let me just make sure people are aware of this. The socialists, the communists, the Marxists, the fascists, all seek, as part of their doctrine, to control the means of production. You. Yeah. Not the capital. Yeah. You. Right? Whereas capitalists, if you're grafting and you're earning a few quid and you save some money up and you've got your little pot of gold there, and then you decide, well, I'll tell you what, I've earned that money from selling eggs. Now I can afford to go and buy 10 more chickens. And you reinvest that money, which is your capital. You've worked for it, right? You're going to the market and selling the eggs. You're coming back and you say, now I've got another. Now all of a sudden you've got a bigger pile of eggs, right? And then you reinvest and reinvest and reinvest, right? That's a free market economy. Everyone needs food. You've put the effort in and the work in to create that business, and you're extending it to the chickens, and then you build a big chicken house, and then you create breeding, and you're doing all these things, and your business starts to thrive. You know, that is a free market economy. That is capitalism. What the socialists are saying is, no, we take 7 of your 10 eggs and we distribute them amongst people who are poor. Well, that means the person he's only got 3 eggs left, and he can't continue building because you're taking his capital away to do. So you're taking from one group of people and giving it to another. Now, a lot of people turn around and say, yeah, but it's only the rich getting what they're seeing at the moment in this country is the British are doing, not the English. And let me just say this to you. The trusts, the real English trusts, the real equity law of England, and the real charities of England, are what real capitalism is about. If I go and earn a small fortune and I decide, I'll tell you what I'm going to do, I'm going to set a trust up, and I am going to donate that trust to this charity to look after the homeless, or to do this, X, Y, Z, or to look after people who are less fortunate than myself, right? That's the way the system should work, not forcibly doing it. So go and have a look at, there was, who was the last leader of the, there was 2 brothers, leader of the Labour Party.
Miliband.
Well, one of the Miliband brothers just happened to go to America. Guess what? He's running a charity. He's on £400,000 a year, right? That's the Labour Party.
That's his golden parachute, isn't it? That's his payoff for what he did while he was in Parliament, for all the scams he was operating while he was an MP. That was his payoff.
Yeah. So again, this is all a British construct, and people need to understand it. So getting back to what is socialism, I consider socialism to be, if you really want to, not the ideology, but the vision that they try and deploy to people is you care about someone or you care about another individual. Don't matter whether they're black, white, brown, yellow. I'm not interested in any of that. I care about them people. If I see someone who's homeless, I don't want them to be homeless. But what they've done is created this system, and all you're ever going to do with that, like I said, it's a bit like looking at bricklayers on a building site. If you have 5 bricklayers and 4 of them can each lay 1,500 bricks a day, right? Going some, but that can be done, right? And then you've got one bricklayer that only lays 500, yeah? Now, what the socialists say is, well, we're not going to put you on price because that would be unfair to the geezer who's only laying 500 bricks. You'll all be earning £600 a day and he'll only be earning £100 a day, right? So the socialists say we're going to put you all on a day rate of £200. So what happens? The other 4 bricklayers who can lay at 1,500 bricks a day all say, that's cracking. We're only going to lay 500 bricks. We're not going to build. So everything starts to go in reverse.
Yeah, the incentive's been removed, hasn't it, for performance or to perform at your best. I think one of the reasons why communism is so embraced by the working class, by the poor, right, is because it's sold to us, the working class, as a method, an ideology, a means, a mechanism to overthrow the landowning elite, the capitalists who are exploiting the people at the bottom, and it gives us the means to overthrow them. Yeah, I think that's why it's been embraced by the working class. But I believe that to be a con, to be a scam, in order for them to be able to win our vote, as it were.
Yeah, and all you'd be doing is no different to the Soviet Union.
Animal farm, isn't it? You're just putting someone else in to chop your head off.
You're just putting someone who's going to be worse, I may add, right? So the best system is a capitalist free market economy. And let me just state this for the record. A capitalist free market economy, I am not talking about you going with a begging bowl to the City of London saying, can we have a loan here, please? And they give you, 30% interest and tear you a new one. I'm talking about if you live in Liverpool, then you would go literally to the Lancashire bank that everyone in that area is paid into, and if they see that you have a viable business plan, they will loan you the money. If you're doing something for England and it is an infrastructure project, for example, that would benefit England as a whole, they could turn around and say, well, actually, we're going to present this for a Treasury money award, right? Which is basically the Bradbury pound, the Currency and Notes Act of 1914, which is how they funded a war, right? So again, Guernsey used it in 1851, Liverpool Notes Act in 1795, I believe it was, right? So it doesn't cause inflation, and you're not giving whoever it is that controls the banking system their corner. They don't deserve a corner.
If you listen to some of the libertarian thinkers like Hans Hermann Hoppe, German libertarian, really interesting guy, he says that we don't have capitalism because capitalism is free market. There is no government force manipulating price, manipulating interest rates, all those things. It's a free market. So when government steps in to control the economy, you automatically default away from capitalism, so that we don't really have it. I mean, that's one of the arguments that they make, and it kind of makes sense to me as well when I look at it a little bit more deeply. So why would we trust the government to manage the economy? I wouldn't trust them to run a bath.
Exactly, and that is the situation. So that guy is exactly right. What he's saying. Let me just touch on a very a controversial subject, right? So we're talking about free markets. Free markets also means that you protect your own market. Yeah. Protectionism is part of a free market economy. And the reason for that is if you get someone like China that can flood your market with steel, and it's going to put, because they operate almost a slave labour system in China, and they can put your own steel industry out of business, right? then you're entitled as an English government to say, we need to adjust that figure. There is a tariff on your steel, and it will stop them, right? The same as if you turn around and looked at the English Channel and you said to the French, and I'm going to give you another example of this in a couple of minutes, if you said to the French, you haven't stopped these illegals illegally crossing the straits and coming over into England and landing on our beaches, so what we're going to do, we're going to put a 50% tariff on all French goods. And that means Peugeot, and that means Citroën, yeah, and what's going to happen there, yeah, and Renault, what's going to happen? Well, all of their goods 50% minimum, and by the way, if it doesn't stop a week later, we're going to add another 10%. So is it 60%?
Well, there are no tariffs in globalism, are they, for that reason? You know.
Well, so what you do is, what happens then? The French have to, and people often don't see this the right way. They think we're going to pay 60% more for their goods. It doesn't work like that. What happens is, suddenly that Renault, yeah, instead of being a 10 grand car, becomes a 16 grand car.
No one buys it.
Right? And no one buys it. But what happens? The French say, we have to lower the profit to compete against the tariff, right? So what happens then? They take 60% off to bring their vehicle in line with the 10 grand again. What happens then? Well, all these other countries turn around and say, well, actually, we're going to import that car, yeah, at that tax price, yeah, and it means that Renault go out of business. What happens then? Renault turn around to the French and say, stop them travelling across there, stop them getting in the boats because you're putting us out of business, right? That's how the tariff works. If you want to know if it works, in the 1980s, we had the same situation with an argument between Denmark and Germany, and they put their tariffs up to 90% on German vehicles, right? How do I know that? Because I used to buy the vehicles from Denmark because I weren't paying duty. We give them the codes for the car, got right-hand drive delivered to this country, and guess what? We was getting cars at a massive discount to everyone else, right? So all of a sudden they said, we've got a problem here. You're going to put Mercedes and BMW out of business, right? Because Denmark said, we're not accepting it, right? That's what happened. Who else did it? Oh, who's that guy? Oh, President Trump. I believe he actually said to the Mexicans, no, you'll be paying. Yeah. You're going to be paying for this border wall, right? And how did he do it? He simply said, there's tariffs on your business. And he kept increasing, right? Until in the end, what did they do? They put troops on the border and they stopped them and they sent them back. They went to their other borders and said, you're not letting them through. There will be no more caravans.
Yeah, it was a powerful tool, wasn't it, that he used while he was in his presidency, not only against Mexico, but most effectively against China. You know, that trade war, you know, was really damaging to China, but ultimately it might have been what lost him his presidency.
So what's the next thing that the Constitution and what we deliver as England? I'll tell you what we do, right? They have destroyed the dignity of work, mostly in the north of England. They have taken our steelworks. They have taken our shipbuilding. They have taken our coal industries. They have taken every industry where we as Englishmen worked in to provide for our families. And they've shut it down for globalism. And they've handed it to China and the European Union. Where's our car manufacturers? They're all gone. What did Blair do? This sacred person of Labour. He sold Rover for £1 to his pal, right? So what I'm saying is, as England, we give the dignity of work back. We restart our industries. We're not interested in having a war in Afghanistan or with Russia. And by the way, Russia's our friend, not our enemy.
That's the British Empire, isn't it? That's engaging in foreign wars and destroying other people's country. It's, you know, it's not the English, is it? Although the English generally get blamed. So just before we move on, I just want to resolve this socialist issue because I think it's important. So, so what you're saying is that there is a socialist coup, if you like, via the British, and socialism opposes the English Constitution, the common law, and the things that are contained within that, because it prevents socialists and socialism from achieving their goals. Therefore, those things must be destroyed in order for Marx's vision to be realized. Yeah. Correct. And also there's something else you touch on, which I think is important, that we are surrounded by socialist governments. Not only do we have socialist parties in the UK, well, in the British Parliament, in the illegal occupation of the English Parliament, but we have them in Wales, Clyde Cymru, the SNP, Sinn Féin in Ireland, and then the actual EU itself is one big socialist organisation. How can England hope to overcome such an all-encompassing enemy?
The answer to that is, look back at your laws. I always use, and I use quite often, the United Nations Declaration for Indigenous Peoples. We are protected via the UN. You can't have. They want to rely on certain UN laws and not others. The 2011 Indigenous Populations Declaration protect us. We have a unique culture, a unique legal system. And the answer is we don't need, we are the England is the sixth largest economy in the world, right? We are just waiting now to bring back our industries, to build our ships, to do that. And we will be in export. We will bring back our navies. We will bring back our military to defend the nation, not to go out and attack like a bunch of mercenaries these other weaker nations. That's not what it's about. But I want to say this just to make sure people do understand the point of this. The United States of America is not it is the greatest nation on earth, right? And it is not the largest land.
Is that due to England's greatest export, which is our Constitution?
Correct. Just look at the logic of it. How did America become the greatest nation on earth? And it was because they adopted the common law. They adopted the English language, and they adopted our way of commerce. And the basics is that free expression, freedom of speech, the freedom to invent. That's how they become the greatest nation on earth. And it's not because they're the greatest populace. It's not because they're the greatest landmass. It's because they had the greatest constitution that was ever given to anyone on this planet. And it was a free export from England.
So wouldn't you say that the Americans are facing the same challenge as the English right now? Because, it seems we've got quite a radical socialist government in there at the moment with, the Democrats and Joe Biden and Nancy Pelosi and all those absolute lunatics who are in charge of America. I mean, aren't the Americans facing the same challenge as it's like a British coup, if you like, of America?
It's exactly what it is. They are being attacked by the English. You've only got to look at the Steele dossier and other elements. You've only got to look at who's controlling the machines, the voting machines. Everyone is looking at China at the moment, the actual culprits. And let me just say this to you. When we started coming under attack as England was when they lost the colony in 1776. The British lost that colony in 1776. The Americans, who were English, standing up for the English rights. They was attacked again in 1812. Who helped them on both occasions? The Russians, right? Helped the Americans, not the British. And then the third attack has been all the way through, culminating in 2016 when they started to attack President Trump. And why? Because they knew he was a constitutionalist. He loved his country and he could not be bought by the British. That is what's good. And they need, the globalists need to destroy America. And I always say this to people, we and our Constitution, England, is the beating heart of the United States of America. And we and what they've done to us is a blueprint of what they're doing in America. And you can see it transferring out there as we speak.
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? Because tyranny kind of is defined as the government being able to change the laws upon a whim without respecting the rights of the individual. It depends what mood the tyrant is in, and that's what the law will be. So you see that in countries where maybe the Roman civil law is in place, is that there is no protections from precedent and common law. And we kind of have seen it manifest during the COVID operation in that wearing masks is not mandatory. There is an exemption, and the exemption is the respect of the common law. Because I went to Portugal recently, and there is no exemption there, right? You wear the mask, there is no exemption, right? Because they're under Roman civil law, So while common law exists, there'll always be an exemption to tyranny for people who want to object to it, stand up to it, and they will have the legal rights to be able to do it. So is this the motivation for our enemies to destroy, these constitutional protections?
The biggest protection,
because common law jurisdictions, it's all over the world, isn't it? It's in India, it's in Africa. There's a common law jurisdictions everywhere.
The most important element of the common law is a jury. Jury nullification, right? Because in common law, if you're standing in front of a judge and you turn around and you look at your peers and you say, the government say I've done this, and the judge turns around and says, well, the law says this, so you have broken the law, You look at your peers and you say to your peers, would you have done the same in my shoes? And if they come back with a not guilty, it's called jury nullification.
But doesn't that mean it's like, I looked into that a while, it was like the jury nullification. The jury is the fourth branch of government, the one that's not really, discussed as such. The fourth branch of government, and the jury has the power to nullify bad law. If it's a statute that's bad law, the jury can ignore it and think, no, we think he's innocent.
Exactly that. And let me just say this to everyone. Why do you think now when you go to a magistrate's, all of these regulations that they're bringing in for various elements, and you can't do this and you can't do that, and it's a regulation, right? Just think about this. Why are all them regulations done in such a way that you don't get a jury?
Star chamber, isn't it?
Exactly.
Okay. Just one more question in relation to this. What the hell was Brexit all about? Was Brexit a move by the British Union to consolidate more power away from the EU, or was Brexit an organic thing by the English in order to try and release ourselves from the yoke of the EU?
I am always surprised at why they allowed and I believe there's a particular reason for it, why they allowed that referendum. By the way, the English have never had a referendum in terms of independence, etc. Scotland's had two. Wales, I believe, has had two. I think even Northern Ireland's had two national referendums. We've had zero. Right. So the direct answer to that is they knew that if the next stage of the European Union was full military union, meaning we lost control of our military, full fiscal union, meaning we went into the euro, and they knew that they couldn't do it by just signing us up to it, that they had to have a referendum. I think they were shocked at the result, and the result, I believe it was probably a lot more than what they said. I was actually at the count in Dartford, and 75% come in and said, we're leaving, right?
I mean, some of the faces on the British MPs were just, classic, where they were shocked. They were white as a ghost. They couldn't believe that it had happened, which makes me think to some level it was organic, that it wasn't their plan.
No, I agree. Yeah. But the next element of this is to say to them same people, that voted for freedom, you need to vote for England. You need to vote English. You need to take back control and remove the British establishment, the British elites, and their slavery and colonisation of England.
We're so demoralised as a people, right? We're so demoralised in trying to understand what is our identity. That's why I think your message is so important, and this information is so powerful, because it remoralises you. It's like, but what do we do? Right? So, okay, we've talked about what the problem is. We've talked about who the problem is, but how can we as individual Englishmen work together to win back our constitution, our parliament, our rights? What activism is required from us as individuals? I mean, what is it that you're doing on the ground, Graham, that people can get involved with?
Well, I've been going to the stand in the parks, and I do constitutional talks. I've never failed yet to get an applause. We have now registered the English Constitution Party, the first time ever.
Is this a political party that will stand in elections?
Yeah. That's now been registered. I had to fight the Electoral Commission over it, and we got registered. We are registered. We have now set up again the limited company for, and again, they didn't, the British Companies House wouldn't allow us to register a company with English in its name.
Amazing.
Believe it or not.
Unbelievable.
We've now succeeded, again, with the threat of legal action. We've now succeeded, and we've got the English Constitution Party Limited. For the first time since Churchill, people can vote for England and vote for an English parliament, a real parliament, not a devolved parliament. And if the people of Scotland want real independence, we'll stand candidates there and we'll give you independence.
Does the English Constitutional Party have a manifesto yet?
Right, we don't believe in manifestos.
Okay.
Manifestos are a construct of the British divide and rule. 90% of what's contained in manifestos is either a lie, a con, or and these people just don't do it. What we've got is 5 strict policies. The first and primary policy is complete independence, not a devolved parliament, complete independence. So it doesn't, basically we're saying the British, you're finished, right? Everyone look round and look at the mess we're in, and you just say, you caused it, you're gone, right? The English are taking back control of their nation. So from a level of local activism, there are 2 elements to what's known as universal suffrage. Universal suffrage means voting rights. We have voting rights. We've just given you a political party, which is the English Constitution Party. There's 2 elements. There's, on the one side, what's known as active suffrage, which means a voter. So if you was going into the box and putting an X, you're the voter. The other is a passive suffrage, but they are 2 hands of the same party. You need candidates, passive, the passive element of suffrage for the people who want to vote. Now we've given people that. So now, again, it's all registered. What we're doing now is going around the country doing the stand in the parks and talking to people. Obviously, there's a big freedom issue with what they've been doing with, let's just say, the virus. And what we want to make sure of is that we're getting this message out that the English Constitution and the common law forbids what they're doing. And the only way you can protect your children and you can protect yourselves going forward is to go back to that situation. And we'll do that.
So the English Constitution Party would see the devolvement and disbanding of the United Kingdom. Wouldn't it be in our interests to form an alliance with our Celtic brethren in Scotland, Wales, Ireland, to rid ourselves of the yoke of the British? Is there a union of some kind to be had with our Celtic brethren? Because unions are good, no? I mean, how does a union work in our favour, in our sovereign favour, rather than being swallowed up by a supranational organisation?
I I agree with you entirely, which is why there are a number of Scottish people who have spoken to me about standing in Scotland for the English Constitution Party. They want to be friends as a brotherhood of nation, as we describe it. It doesn't affect the Commonwealth. It doesn't, in other words, the Commonwealth still exists. You just add 3 different nations to it. It's a bit more awkward for us in Northern Ireland. There's a lot more that you have to do to get registered in Northern Ireland as a political party. I have no doubt that the loyalists, and the people don't understand the difference between a unionist and a loyalist. A loyalist is in Northern Ireland, the original loyalists are loyal to what give us them their protection, which was the Bill of Rights and King William, right? So unionists we're not interested in terms of, when you talk about unionists as the British supranational state, not interested. The unification of the crowns existed in 1603. That continues. What we're doing is taking and removing the cancer of the British imperial colonial system away, getting rid of it, and then saying, right, let's start this again and we'll move forward, and the whole world will be a better place. Getting back to the Scots love the idea of independence. The problem you've got with the SNP is they're socialists. The problem you've already mentioned it with Plaid Cymru, is they're socialists. The problem you've got with Sinn Féin, and if you've only got to go and have a look at the IRA's Green Book, which is their constitution, and it tells you they're sworn to socialism. So they're always going to. You need another group of people that set up in Scotland as real independents. People in Scotland want independence from the British. They don't want to go back into the European Union, but the socialists do.
Interesting. Okay, finishing up. People who are currently facing harassment and persecution by the British state during this illegal occupation, and what we're seeing now, especially as they're ramping up the tyranny with the COVID operation. How can people enforce their rights in court? Because aren't the courts, haven't they been taken by a foreign occupying power? I mean, how can we enforce our rights? How do we win in court, Graham?
The easiest way to win in court is to use the law of tort. In exactly the same way. So, for example, if you was to be forcibly on a video, I don't want to actually say it. If you was forcibly, Let's just say that.
From that, aren't we, by common law assault, and then GBH if it causes injury.
So you've got the common law torts of battery. You've got the common law torts of assault. Now, assault means it's a threat of violence. You have got the common law with you. You're not allowed to be coerced. You're not allowed to use propaganda against the people, which is what they're doing. You're not allowed to say to people, you have the right to say no, whatever happens. It's your body. You have bodily integrity, and the common law stands for that. What we've got to do is make sure that people out there understand. I've got a couple of letters that I put out to people that went to schools and went to employees. We know that they caused them. It was all common law, real common law, meaning precedents from the Supreme Court and the House of Lords. They've got a big problem, and they know it. That's the thing. So the real common law courts, and if you like, is the law of tort. Unfortunately, we have got a situation, and I will say this: all British judges will be purged from our judiciary when England returns to an English sovereign nation. In the same way, and this is not a negative, it's a positive, in the same way as when the Soviet Union disbanded, the first thing the Russians did in Russia was purge the judiciary of Soviet judges.
It's a good comparison as well, because there's a fantastic film called The Lives of Others, which shows you what happened in Eastern Germany under the Soviet rule. And when the wall fell, when Soviet Union fell, when communism fell, it fell in 24 hours. It was gone. Right? And that's how quick it can go, even though the enemy seems like, unbeatable. It's actually quite fragile. And it's funny you should say that about court, is that I've got quite a bit of experience of court myself from 2010 to about 2016. And I brought a defamation case in the High Court. I brought it myself as a litigant in person because it was being defamed by, communists, calling me, trying to destroy my reputation. And I brought an action for defamation, and I won. When I won in the court and won in the High Court. But what's interesting is that's any case won in the High Court becomes a precedent and part of English legal history. So I take some pride in the fact that I'm now part of English legal history, and Eastman versus Ford is always there for posterity. I'll post it in the show description for anyone that wants to have a look at it. But yeah, it is possible for us to win in the courts. I just think we need more confidence to do it.
And let me just emphasise this to people. No, I have actually read your case, by the way, and I'm really pleased to see that you was a litigant person, and not only that, you won the case and got awarded in damages, I believe, for £10,000. Let me just say this to people. It's people like you that are standing up for your English rights. You are the type of person that will take back control of this country. I want to emphasise that when these people say things on Twitter about us, they can be sued, right? And you've made that quite evident by doing what you're doing. But the next thing I will say to you is, remember that when you stand in an election and the election has been called and the campaign is on, if you say anything about a candidate that is, it doesn't just, and let me just make sure people understand this, it doesn't have to be untrue. It can be true, but if it is said with malice, you can be sued. It's actually a criminal offence during a campaign, right? And people need to understand that. Election law is different to normal law. And if you say something, even if it's true, but you have said it for malicious reasons against another campaign candidate, it's a criminal offence. Right, so just to make sure everyone understands that. So again, English law will always come through, and again, we just want people to take it up and run with it.
So let's leave us on a high grain. This has been a fantastic conversation, and I've loved it. What's happening right now with the movement? I mean, where are we at? What's the good news to share with everybody?
The good news to share is the Electoral Commission registers us as a political party. We've now got our own political party called the English Constitution Party, the only group of people ever started standing as constitutionalists since Winston Churchill. We believe in the people of England, so we believe in you, and that's basically where we're at. We've now created for the legal reasons of donations, we've created the English Constitution Party Limited. Everything goes through there. We've got everything set up. We're ready to go. The first election is going to be Southend West, where unfortunately David Amess was murdered. And we will be standing in that election as constitutionalists, saying to the people of Southend and the country to give us as much support as possible.
Fantastic, Graham. I just want to thank you for what you're doing as well, because you've remoralised me. You've given me a good boost, and you've really helped me to define what it is that I'm about and who I am. And I'm an English constitutionalist. Thanks for giving me that definition. I hope to speak to you again soon, where we can go into these subjects in more depth, because we've only touched we've only scratched the surface, really, haven't we? And if you ever want to come on and share news with us, that would be fantastic. We'd love to have you on again. So if people want to find you, your work, the movement, where can they find you?
Right, so the website is already set up, and you can go and have a look at what we stand for and the blogs, and that is www.englishconstitutionparty.com. Or you can go to daddydragon.co.uk.
Okay. Have you got any social media platforms?
I got took down on Twitter, but I've restarted it. I had 12,500 followers. They removed my account. I was on Facebook. They removed my account. I was on YouTube. They refused my account. So anything you start talking about England,
yeah. Okay, well, listen, Graham Moore, Daddy Dragon, it's been an honour and a pleasure, and I look forward to speaking to you again soon. Take care.
Yeah, no worries. Thank you.